everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to present on the U.S. legislative landscape for FGMC, including insights for service providers and community allies. First, we just want to provide this disclaimer. This project is supported by our OVW grant, and the opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations that are expressed in this webinar do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Justice. So we're going to start off with a poll. So I'm going to launch that. So you'll see that pop up on your screen. So if you can take a little bit of time, it's just 4 questions. We just really want to learn a little bit about your understanding of FGMC as before we really get into the content of this webinar. And while you are taking some time to fill out the poll, I'm going to go over the agenda for today. So we are starting off now with the welcome and the introductions. We're going to go over very, very briefly a very quick overview of FGMC. We have previously done an introduction of FGMC under this grant. So if you are interested in the recording of that webinar, please feel free to contact us, and we'll be putting our contact information in the chat for you all throughout this webinar so that you can get a copy of that recording. So today will just be a very, very quick overview of FGMC. Then we're going to go into introduction to the legal framework of FGMC in the United States. We're going to talk about some legislative advocacy and policy change, including some concrete examples. And then we're going to talk about the role of service providers and community allies. And then at last, give it, hopefully with some time, we'll be able to answer some questions and do some closing as well. So let it just take a look at this poll. We'll give it a few more minutes. So if you can take a look at that poll. We, like I mentioned, are just trying to get an understanding of your current knowledge and understanding about FGMC. So I'll leave it up for about 1 more minute. And also, once you are done with the poll, we would love to hear from you about who you are, who is in the room with us today. So if you can introduce yourselves in the chat and share about what brought you to our training today. Why are you here? If you have any questions or anything that you hope to get out of this training as well, we would love to hear about that. And as you all are introducing yourselves, I'm going to introduce us and who we are. So first, this webinar is put on by the FGMC Training and Technical Assistance team. We are a collaborative group of 4 different organizations, SAO US, the US End FGMC Network, which is where I'm from, and my colleagues who are presenting today, George Washington University and Global Women Peace Foundation. So we are a collaborative group of organizations. We have decades of experience around this topic of FGMC. And we are working together on this project with the Office of Violence Against Women to provide training and technical assistance for OVW grantees and potential grantees to learn how to provide services for FGMC survivors. And then our facilitators for today, myself, I haven't properly introduced myself, but I'm Caitlin LeMay. I'm the Executive Director of the US End FGMC Network. And then I am here with my colleagues, Isatu Jang, who is our Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator, and Caitlin Mitchell, who is our Policy and Advocacy Coordinator. We are all from the US End FGMC Network, which is a member-based national organization that we have about 200 member organizations. That is a diverse group of survivors, activists, healthcare providers, policy organizations, really anybody that is working to address FGMC in the United States, but globally as well. All right, so I am going to close that poll. And I see you all introducing yourselves in the chat, so thank you for doing that. And please feel free to keep using the chat. Please keep the conversation going. We're going to be sharing some videos throughout, so please, react to the videos in the chat, ask questions. That is, we want to definitely keep the conversations going. And so without further ado, and these are the TA partners, which I already introduced. And we will share a link to our link tree in the chat as well, where you can learn more about our TA project and our different organizations as well. All right, without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Isatu.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. As Caitlin introduced me, my name is Isatu Jang. I work with the US and FGMC Network as the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. As Caitlin mentioned earlier, we will be briefly looking at FGMC definition and the types. And then we will share the link, as Caitlin promised, in the chat that an FGMC training 101 that we did that is more detailed and comprehensive. So all of you can have the opportunity to, to watch that recording and get more information about what FGMC is. As defined by World Health Organization, next slide, please. Female genital mutilation or cutting refers to the partial or total removal of the female assigned external genitalia or other injuries to the female assigned female organs for non-medical reasons. Underline that. But also, the fact that WHO has a definition for FGMC and highlighting some of the international recognition around the topic, particularly as a human rights violation and an extreme form of violence against women and girls. We also have to note that this practice generally occurs on minors, girls, minor girls, and it happens everywhere. It can happen anywhere, and it's from birth to puberty. So in some circumstances, it also occurs to adult women. So basically that's the general definition by World Health Organization. Looking at the types, World Health Organization outlines 4 major categories of female genital mutilation. And as you can see on these images, I will briefly mention these 4 types. So we have type 1 to 3, with type 4 referred to as the other. Type 1 is the removal of the clitoral hood, with or without the removal or partial or part of the clitoris. That's the type 1. Type 2 is the procedure that involves the partial or total removal of the clitoris and the labia minora, and or without the removal of or part of the labia majora. Then type 3 is referred to as infabulation, which is the narrowing of the vaginal orifice, usually by creating a seal, and this often involves cutting or repositioning the labia majora, and some of the clitoris as well. So I just want to note that while these categories ranges from less severe, that is the type 1, to the severe one, type 3, and again type 4 as the other category, including pickering, pacing, or co-authorizing, etc. Yeah, so also I want us to note that FGMC is not a standardized practice. Therefore, these are just broad categories of the types of FGMC that have been documented. And the severity and trauma related to undergoing the practice varies greatly between person to person, and therefore their individual experience. So we just want to put that across, that our survivors' experience differ from person to person. I mean, I am a survivor of FGMC. My experience might differ from someone who has gone through the practice. So, I mean, we avoid generalizing experiences, just to note that. So, as I mentioned, earlier, we will be sharing the link in the chat, and then, yeah, so which has more detailed, definitions and, types and, types and impacts of FGMC. So please feel free to access that recording if you're really interested in learning more about FGMC. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we have an FGMC survivor, Absa Samba, who was part of the Voices to End FGMC project led by SEO, Story Center, and Asian Women's Shelter. Absa share her personal journey, as an FGMC survivor. Her video title is Please Listen. We will watch this video. Please feel free to share your reactions in the chat while the video is on.
In 6th grade, a group of popular girls at my school were saying they wanted to be friends only with those who are pure and clean, meaning only those girls who had been cut. That was the very first time I had my peers discussing the topic. I wasn't sure whether or not I had been through the procedure. So I went home that day and I asked my mom, "Puntata nya katole?" I was so excited when my mom answered yes. At school the next day, I joined the popular group in shaming the girls who hadn't been cut. Solima, we called them. Then in middle school, I joined a club that taught us how harmful FGM is to the girls who were cut and to society. I felt ashamed and guilty for all the girls I had shamed for not being cut. I wondered how many of them had gone home and asked their families to subject them to FGM. I was also angry at the community for continuing to subject girls and women to something so unnecessary and painful. So I started having conversations with my family about the harmful effects of the practice. And when I didn't succeed at home, I talked about it on the radio and made them listen. Over the years, I have engaged in education and advocacy work, traveling across communities in the Gambia, hosting radio talk shows, presenting in various classrooms in the US, and even testifying before a Vermont Senate committee on a bill criminalizing FGM. And yet, as my activism grows, one thing continues to trouble me. How do I convince the world to end such a horrible practice? when I still cannot convince some of my own family members.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we brought Absa's video to remind ourselves that we all have a moral obligation to contribute in the movement to end FGMC. Absa is from the Gambia, based in Washington. This video came before, before her recent, before her recent contribution, or before she founded the Washington Coalition to End FGMC in 2023, Absa led a coalition during her graduate program at the University of Washington, where she led a coalition that led to state legislation against FGMC in 2023 as the 41st state that outlawed FGMC. Absa is from the Gambia, and since Gambia, she has been contributing immensely to the movement to end FGMC. And even as she moved to the US, she continued that, the struggle, the advocacy, and we really want to recognize and say a big thank you to Absa and her colleagues for leading, this efforts, this campaign to end FGMC. So just a reminder that, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter where you're based, it doesn't matter whether you are a survivor or not. It is a moral obligation upon all of us to contribute in ending female genital mutilation. So without further ado, I will pass it on to my colleague, Caitlin Limay, to take us through the next section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aissatou, and especially for that also powerful call to action for all of us too, around how we all have a place in this work. So this next section is around the legal framework of FGMC in the U.S. Specifically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislative history and also talk a little bit about the federal law and state laws as well. And the reason for this isn't necessarily to get down into the details of all the laws and all of that stuff, but more around as I'm assuming, there's advocates who are here, and we at the network have had multiple instances where people have reached out to us and said, I've heard about, a girl at risk of FGMC, or am working with a survivor, and I've reached out to either local law enforcement or Child Protective Services or, somebody else, and have been told, oh, well, either a crime hasn't been committed yet, so there's nothing I can do, or they've just been faced with just challenges or a wall, or just haven't known what to do. And so our reason for sharing this information around the laws is more as a tool so that you know what your rights are and what the survivor's rights are, or for girls at risk and what their rights are. And so that is sort of the purpose of this next section. And also so you know where to go and some resources as well, particularly for the advocates who are here with us. And so if you were to work with a survivor or a girl at risk, you know where you can go and what the laws state around FGMC, because there is still a lot of education that we need to do around what the laws say. So with that being said, here's I'm going to go through this very quickly because there's actually a lot to our history, both legislatively but also just around FGMC in the US. So this is just around our legislative history on FGMC in the US, but in the US, we have a long history around FGMC, particularly around the medicalization. So FGMC, it's often framed as an immigrant issue, but that's false. And FGMC has a long history of being practiced within our healthcare systems. And so I want to just state that from the get-go here. And so FGMC was a treatment for things like lesbianism, hysteria, things like that within our healthcare system. It was actually covered by health insurance. And so it's important to just know that the US has a long history of FGMC. But this timeline is just of our legislative history. So in 1996, it was criminalized in a specific law, specific to FGMC. That isn't to say that FGMC could have been covered by other general laws specific to child abuse and other laws. But we had our first specific law related to FGMC passed in 1996. And then in 2013, that federal law was amended to prohibit the practice of vacation cutting, which is when a girl is transported out of the country for the purpose of being cut. And then 4 years later, in 2017, there was a federal case, U.S. versus Nagarwala, which was the first federal prosecution, which included a U.S. doctor performing FGMC. Again, when we talk about the medicalization of FGMC and FGMC being done within the U.S. healthcare settings, this once again was a U.S. doctor performing FGMC. That case actually resulted in the federal law being overturned. And so it was a very complicated case, which I don't have time to really get into all of the details, and that could be a whole webinar all on its own. And I am not an attorney to go into all of the details, but the result of it is that a district court did overturn parts of the federal law. However, what happened as a result of that is that the federal judge in their ruling stated that FGMC should be left up to the states. And so states took that into their own hands and said that we need to pass state laws to make sure that girls are protected. And so after this case out of Detroit, Michigan, we saw a huge increase in state laws being passed. And so when you look at a history of state laws being passed around FGMC, there is a spike right after 2019. 2019, 2020, 2021 is where a majority of state laws passed related to FGMC. And it is specifically in relation to this federal law being overturned. But then in 2021, we saw the passage of the Stop FGM Act of 2020. So this was signed into law. So we do have a federal law, which I will go into. And this, once again, provided increased federal protections. And then we saw another federal prosecution case out of Houston, Texas, that was specifically related to vacation cutting. That case was dismissed. So we haven't seen any sentences related to FGMC on the federal level. And we've seen 2 federal cases, but none of them have been successful. So that's our legislative history, just very, very quickly. But this is our federal law, the Stop FGM Act, or the Strengthening the Opposition to Female Genital Mutilation Act of 2020. So what this law states is that anyone who knowingly performs, attempts to perform, or conspires to perform FGMC on another person who has not yet attained the age of 18, so a minor, any parent, guardian, or caretaker of a person who facilitates or consents to FGMC, or anyone who transports a person under 18 for the person of undergoing FGMC. So anyone who falls under that is fined or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both. So they're either fined or imprisoned or both. Um, excuse me. And then on top of that, so that's the criminalization piece of our federal law. But on top of that, our federal law also states that it is not a defense to prosecution that FGMC is required as a matter of religion, custom, tradition, ritual, or standard practice. So someone cannot say, it is my religious right to practice FGMC, for example. And so that is an important piece to this law. And then on top of that, the Attorney General must submit a report to Congress annually that includes an estimate of the number of women and girls at risk who have undergone FGMC and protections that are available and actions that have been taken to address FGMC from the federal government, and then actions taken by federal agencies to educate and assist communities about FGMC. So there's also this accountability measure for the federal government as well that has been included in the federal law. So that's also a very important provision. So that was the federal law. The other key legislative piece is that the reauthorization of VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act of 2021, included FGMC for the very first time. And so this was a huge win for our field because we know that FGMC is a form of gender-based violence and violence against women. But it wasn't actually included in the Violence Against Women Act until the reauthorization of 2021. And so what is included is the developing, enlarging, or strengthening culturally specific victim services in responses to FGMC, culturally specific programs and projects regarding responses to and prevention of FGMC, and FGMC is listed among the other forms of violence against women included in the Act. And so for any OVW grantees who are part of this webinar, that is important to note because FGMC is included in these other forms of violence against women. So talking about state laws, there is a interactive map that the U.S. network has created and keeps updated alongside Equality Now, and we can share the link in the chat. So if you're curious about, what your local state law states about FGMC, if you have a state law, you can look at this interactive map. What's important is that every state law is obviously different, right? We know that about state laws. And the current landscape right now is that there are still 9 US states that do not have specific laws prohibiting FGMC. So those state laws are in gray on this map. And it's also important to know that state laws have an important role to play compared to the federal law. And so even though we have a federal law that protects survivors or girls at risk, state laws also have an important role to play and can fill a lot of gaps that the federal law isn't able to provide. So for example, state laws work on the community level. They can provide important community and education provisions, for example, requiring local Department of Health to provide education to healthcare providers or communities or local law enforcement around FGMC, for example. They also can provide mandates around mandated reporting, right, on the state level that the federal law can't provide. And so there's a lot of provisions on the state level that the federal law can't provide. And so it's still so important for state laws or for states to have laws prohibiting FGMC as well. And so again, we'll put, Feiruz put the link in the chat for that state map. So you can look at all of the different state laws to see what your local state has. I will say for the different territories as well, because I know this question has come up in the past. Currently, none of the U.S. territories have any laws prohibiting FGMC. So I just wanted to add that in as well. And each of these states, they vary significantly on the strength of their laws. So, for example, some have provisions around vacation cutting, some have education and outreach provisions. Some are actually incredibly harmful and provide language that are specifically targeting to immigrant communities, for example. So they just vary greatly. And of course, if you have any questions about your state law or any of the provisions and anything like that, you are welcome to get in touch with us and we can help connect you with either somebody locally or can help answer your questions. So our contact information has been provided and we'll share it again. So with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Caitlin, to share more about legislative advocacy and policy change.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thanks for the comprehensive overview of legislation, or FGMC legislation, rather, in the U.S. And it's specifically great to hear about the importance of having state laws in addition to the federal law. As Caitlin mentioned, I am the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at the network, and I will move right into the advocacy piece that has contributed to passing legislation and discuss what has made this advocacy so successful. I'm going to provide two concrete examples from two states that have engaged in policy and advocacy in an effort to pass FGMC bills. And although these examples are related to passing legislation, the strategies that I'm going to share are actually applicable outside of lobbying and policy change, and they can apply more broadly to movement building and community mobilization in general. And so in the following examples, you will actually notice, missed a slide, sorry about that. You will actually notice that the advocacy was survivor and youth-led, and that it centered around the community. It included a champion that had some sort of power or authority to assist in moving things along, and that it successfully built coalitions and movements. So our first example is from the state of Massachusetts. So 2013, we had survivors and advocates from a variety of sectors come together to address FGMC in the state of Massachusetts. And these individuals and organizations ended up forming a coalition, which was the Massachusetts Coalition to End FGMC. And they worked to create a holistic law, which ultimately would protect children from FGMC in the state. Massachusetts did go on to pass a law in 2020, but it's important to note the advocacy that took place during the 7 years between 2013 and 2020, which led to this decision ultimately. And a large portion of this advocacy involved engaging the public and the community to gather support for addressing FGMC. And in order to garner this support, various activities and events were organized, including the screening of several digital stories from SEO's Voices to End FGMC project, which we've already seen an absence video, and we will actually have a chance to view another video at the conclusion of my presentation. But the coalition, they hosted a roundtable on FGMC, and this roundtable was significant because it was the first of its kind, and it brought together around 60 experts, I believe, from a variety of disciplines and cultural groups to highlight the issue of FGMC, but also to share information and resources around ending the practice in the state. And these experts included community leaders, civil society organizations, health professionals, government officials. Yes, I think that's all. And then lastly, and what was very significant in the state of Massachusetts was a change.org petition that was developed by SEO's co-founder and U.S. Executive Director Maria Taher. And this petition particularly received over 400,000 signatures, I believe, in support of the law. And there was actually a delivery event as a result of that highlighted the significance of the petition. In Massachusetts specifically, it's important to note that although the law was passed in 2020, there actually was not a lot of work being done in this area until last year. And that was when a funding opportunity arose. And the work that is actually being done now, which is a part of the Massachusetts Community Healthy Aging Project, that builds actually directly off of the coalition's work in passing the law, and specifically the relationship that was built with the Department of Health. And so now we are actually going to watch a short video that depicts the change.org petition that I just mentioned, which Maria Taher created and that received over 400,000 signatures. So. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yes, I think the video does a great job bringing the petition to life and really illustrating the impact that the said petition had on the advocacy efforts in the state of Massachusetts. Okay, so my next example is from Washington State. And I know that Isa2 mentioned earlier that in 2022, Absa Samba, who at the time was a student at the University of Washington, organized other young people, survivors, community members to form the Washington Coalition to End FGMC. And this was actually part of a class project that she was undertaking. And so in Washington, we see, just like in Massachusetts, that the coalition was survivor-led, that it was youth-led, it was community-centered. This is particularly important to mention because in the past, previous FGMC legislation did not move forward because it had not been community-centered and survivor-led. So similar to Massachusetts and Washington, the coalition members also hosted a roundtable and a webinar to share information and answer questions regarding FGMC. And then furthermore, to facilitate communication and interaction between the community and the legislators, they actually created a call to action as well. And this allowed community members to show their support for ending FGMC and to encourage legislators to listen to the voices of community members. What played a significant role in the success of the advocacy in Washington specifically was the fact that the coalition and even the community more broadly, they had a government champion, and that was Senator Karen Kaiser. And Senator Kaiser's ability to engage with survivors and the community, in addition to rallying support for Bill SB 5443, that actually made all the difference. And I would like to say that a key takeaway here is that champions don't have to be government officials. Obviously, in this case, Senator Kaiser was a government official, but champions can be community leaders, healthcare administrators, school administrators, really anybody that's in a position of power or has some type of authority to assist you with moving things along. And just to point out that this coalition remains active. We actually met yesterday, and members continue to engage in this work, and they are still focusing on implementing the legislation since the law has been passed. And yeah, I will just end with saying that while these two examples are specific to policy, the foundation of this advocacy actually involved organizing, collaborating, movement building, and these are not specific to policy, these activities, and they can actually be applied to addressing a variety of issues through community-based projects. And so the same sort of tactics and activities that the coalitions use can actually address issues and make improvements in the majority of systems and settings. And in fact, just to note, domestic and sexual assault advocates were actually a part of both coalitions and played a significant role in mobilizing their networks and their communities, including survivors. So yes, and so as promised, we will watch another video from the Voices to End FGMC project. This video in particular is from Ami Kujabi. I hope I am pronouncing Ami's name right. And the title is Unmatched. I hope that you enjoy this film, and please feel free to share your reactions in the chat. Thanks.
I was so happy when you were born, but then I remembered you were a girl. When I was your age, I wondered, why did no one protect me? I want you to know that I tried to protect you. I want to tell you a story about my scar. It happened when I was 6 years old. My parents told me I was going to my dad's village. When we arrived, my grandmother said, "We are all going to a banana plantation." The next day, there was singing and dancing, and for a while I was happy, until I was abruptly snatched from the crowd, taken into a hut, laid on the ground, and cut. No banana plantation. Everything had been a lie. I felt deceived. I had been sent there just for FGMC. As the wound healed into a scar, a lot changed. I was no longer interested in playing with my siblings. I blamed my mom for what happened, even though it was my dad's side of the family. But my dad just said, "It's a woman thing. I have no say in it." More than a decade later, I started asking questions. My mom said, "It was best for you girls because it keeps you virgins until you are married." I told her more than half of the girls I went into the bush with had kids out of wedlock. When I got pregnant myself, Instead of thinking about whether I'd have a healthy baby, I worried what would happen if I had a girl. We would only cut her just a little, family members said. I said, no, don't even try to get this done. I now am not afraid to talk in public about stopping FGMC. I joined a coalition in Washington state working to pass a law against it. If there had been laws when I was a child, things would be different. I was able to convince another family member not to have her girls cut. But I wasn't able to convince your mother. All I think is that I failed you. I wish I didn't have the scar. I wish you didn't have one either. But we don't have to be silent about it.
Thank you, Caitlin. Caitlin, do you want to say something before I take it on? Caitlin with K.
Yes. Thank you for specifying. Yes, I was just going to say what a incredibly beautiful and impactful video, and just the fact that Ami specifically says if there had been laws when I was growing up, I would not have been cut. And I think that's what we're here to discuss today, right? The importance of legislation and of the advocacy that gets us there. So that's what I'll end with.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. So that takes us to our the next section on the role of service providers and community allies in the implementation of laws against FGMC. Ami's video reminded me, like, I'm from the same country with Ami as well. Yeah, and I 100% agree when she said if there was a law in the Gambia at the time when we were subjected to this practice, we perhaps might escape from this practice. So I 100% concur with Ami. And that is just to remind us the importance of legislation, as Caitlin mentioned. This particular section, I believe some of us here, some of the participants here are service providers, if not community allies. And that takes us to the next slide, please. Yeah, if you look at these this list, these are examples of service providers and community allies. Just to note, this is not an exhaustive list. In case you know of a service provider or community ally that is not mentioned in this list, please feel free to add it, using the chat box. The arrow is used to indicate or signify that these groups can play both roles depending on circumstances. I know Ami, we work together in Gambia. I will use her as an example. And now she's based in Washington. And Ami was working with an organization that serves, children and youth. But also in her capacity while contributing or being part of the coalition, and the Washington Coalition against FGMC. Ami is an example of someone who played dual role, like multiple, or I would say a double role, as both as a service provider and also as a community ally. So you can be both at the same time. It doesn't mean if you are a healthcare provider, you can be a community ally. So a healthcare provider can be both a service provider and a community ally. So that's why we have these rules, just to exemplify or to, signify that, service, you can play both roles depending on the circumstance at the time. So in case you know of any other like any other term or if you want to add to this list, please feel free to add to this list. It's not an exhaustive, it's not an exhaustive list, as I mentioned. It's just an example. Next slide. So we are looking at the legal requirements for service providers. It is important to note that we all, like, as I mentioned, again, I'm going to mention this. It is important to know that we all have a duty to protect children from FGMC, and that is to report, protect, educate, advocate, and provide support to survivors of FGMC. However, we must understand that healthcare providers, educators, social workers, and law enforcement officers are considered mandatory reporters in many states. If they suspect child abuse or neglect, and which includes female genital mutilation or cutting. So if you know of any mandatory reporters outside what the list I mentioned, that is healthcare providers, educators, social workers, and law enforcement officers, please feel free again to add it to, suggest, include it in the chat box. We are happy to learn more as well. Other service providers and community allies might not necessarily be mandatory report. Might not necessarily be mandated to report, but have the right to report because, as I mentioned before, again, it is a moral duty on us to protect children from FGMC. So you might not be a law enforcement officer or a social worker or a healthcare provider or a school administrator or educator, but yet still protecting children from abuse, neglect, including female genital mutilation, is a moral obligation on all of us. So we must report cases when we suspect that a child is at risk of FGMC. So, and that takes us to the next slide, please. So here, we are looking at cross-sector collaboration. In the work, in child protection, work, in this case, female genital mutilation, no one can do it alone. No one organization can do it alone. It requires collaborative efforts, in working together, in protecting children from FGMC. So I will read this case study and we will discuss it further. A 13-year-old girl called Ida has recently been brought to a rape crisis center in a U.S. city by her mother for a weekly counseling appointment. The center is known for serving a diverse population. During the consultation, a sexual an SDV advocate, Jay, notices subtle signs that suggest Ida may be at risk for FGMC. Specifically, signs of recent family discussions about returning to their home country, where FGMC is widespread cultural practice. Furthermore, Ida appears anxious when asked about her upcoming trip, but hesitates to discuss it further. So we will discuss this further with that in the next slide. So this is where I want us to share insights and our understanding or what we think Jane should do in this case. As we've seen the case study, please share in the chat what you think Jane should do. I'll give a moment for us to reflect on this, and then we will discuss it further in the next slide. So I'll give about a minute or so for people to share what their thoughts are on this as to what Jane should do in this case. Please feel free to share thoughts in the chat. We would also love to learn and hear from all of you. as I mentioned, we also love to hear and learn from each other. So please feel free to share thoughts in the chat as to what Jane should do in this case. All right, then we will move to the next slide. Okay, so as you can see on your screen, first, Jane should assess the risk of FGMC. Jane should assess whether Ida's anxiety relates to concerns about FGMC. But also, while speaking to Ida, Jane should be very mindful and very careful to use simple and non-threatening language, ensuring that the conversation is appropriate for a 13-year-old. Because the goal is just to gather information without causing undue stress or discomfort to Ida. And in the event that no risk is identified, Jane still can share information on FGMC with Ida and her mom. It is important, FGMC information, everyone should, I believe everyone should have access to information on FGMC and other child-related, issues. So even if Jane do not identify any risk, she should be able to share, information about FGMC with Ida and her mom. And maybe Ida and her mom are not, very, do not have much understanding about FGMC. So these will be an opportunity to share more with them. And if Jane is able to establish that Ida might be at risk, again, the next step is to educate Ida's mom. So the information sharing can happen in both scenarios, in both circumstances. Whether a risk is identified or not, Jane should share information about FGMC. And in the event that a risk is identified, still the first step should be to educate Ida's mom about the legal and health implications of FGMC, providing resources about the law in the US and the physical and psychological risk of the practice. And again, this conversation must be handled delicately, as the mother may not fully understand the potential harm or legal consequences. Just to emphasize and note that not everyone that subject their daughters or children to FGMC understand the health implications of the practice. I will use myself as an example. My mom subjected me to FGMC because she thought that it was best for me. And when I started my advocacy against FGMC since when I was a teenager, and she was my first target, I educated her, and then she apologized to me and said it's because she didn't know. So that tells you that not everyone that subject their children to FGMC understand the implications or the complications related to the practice. So in this case, Jane sharing information about FGMC with Ida's mom and Ida, might be an opportunity for Ida's mom to learn more about FGMC. And in learning more about FGMC, even if she had intention of subjecting Ida to the practice, she might reverse her decision and stop and save Ida from going through the practice. So sometimes it's important for us to recognize and understand that it is not parents do not subject their children to FGMC to harm them. It's because they do not understand, its implications. The next potential step for Jane is to involve child protection services or law enforcement. But I want us to be very careful in this in this third part. That's why I use the word potentially. Because if that Jane can only do that if she believes either is at risk of undergoing FGMC. Because she is legally obligated to report. But we have to be very careful in this instance, because if the risk is not thoroughly assessed and make sure that for Jane to believe or make sure that there is definitely a risk, there is no need to involve child protection or law enforcement officers. Because if I'm not mistaken, there has been an issue like this in one of the states where someone, Caitlin might share more on this, where a parent was reported as of having a child at risk, and it didn't turn out to be that case. So that's why we have to be very careful in involving law enforcement or child protection services. In many states, social workers and other service providers, as mentioned earlier, are mandatory reporters and must report suspicion of child abuse, including the risk of FGMC, as I mentioned. However, it is very crucial. This is what I've been saying. It is very crucial to handle such cases with utmost tolerance and respect for family. Even if Ida is at risk, even if Jane fully established that Ida is at risk, Jane must make sure that the case is handled with utmost respect, tolerance, and care for family. As I mentioned earlier, parents might not have the information or might not have the understanding that this is harmful. That's why they do it. But even if there is an established risk, make sure it is handled with utmost tolerance and respect for the family. So the next step, and I also make a note again, and I emphasize on this: do not involve child protection services or law enforcement if no evidence or risk is identified. So that's very important, and we have to be very mindful in our approach to screening suspected cases. And again, this takes us back to when Jane, the first step when Jane was assessing, risk of FGMC. It is important to, approach screenings, suspected cases of FGMC, because the issue is a global issue. I brought this part because there is a lot of misconception that FGMC is an immigrant issue. It only happens in African countries or in Asia or among immigrants in the United States. And as Caitlin, as we had Caitlin, mention that there have been history of, FGMC in the United States for a very long time. So, and as we speak, Caitlin also mentioned this, FGMC happens in 94 countries, according to recent, global report. So, and it happens in the US as well. So not only among immigrants. So that's why we have to be very careful in screening. Because, so just someone is from a specific region or from a specific country doesn't mean they'll be caught or, not caught. So the best practice to apply in screening girls is to treat everyone, the same. If you're screening a suspected case, it doesn't mean that, for instance, Ida is from the Gambia. I'm using myself as an example. I use Ida because Ida is my nickname here. So from the Gambia, so you will only screen those who are from emerging, countries that practice FGMC. Just we have to understand that FGMC is a global issue. It happens everywhere, including the United States. So I just want to echo that we have to be very courteous and careful on how we treat such cases, just to avoid people feeling that they have been discriminated also. The next step is for Jane is to support Ida through follow-up appointments. Even in this case, even if Ida is at risk or not, Jane should be able to follow up on Ida, because already Jane has assessed whether Ida is at risk or not, and she should be able to support Ida through follow-up appointments, just to provide her with trauma informed care, to ensure that Ida has this the psychological support she needs during this potentially stressful time. Even if she's not at risk, already she has been put on, she has been traumatized in the process of, screening or assessing whether she's at risk or not. And even if she's not at risk, she should be able to, receive trauma-informed care, even after, involving child protection or not. Even after involving child protection service or law enforcement, it is important for Jane to continue following up on Ida and provide her all the necessary support that she might need during that stressful time. And lastly is documentation. Jane should make sure that she documents everything, including concerns, interactions with Ida, and steps taken, using the patient's medical record. So she should be able to take note of, every conversation that she had with Ida, as well as, law enforcement, law enforcement agents involved in this process. Just to make sure that there is transparency and continuity of care. So this is some of the examples that we believe that Jane should do in this case, as the case study applies. So in case you have additional ideas as to what Jane should do, please feel free to share in the chat. We will go to the next slide quickly as we are running against time. So yeah, so that takes us to forms of collaboration, as we mentioned, as we are discussing cross-sector collaboration. How can service providers, community allies, collaborate to making sure the law is implemented accordingly as expected and children are protected from FGMC? We can do training and capacity building. Service providers should be able to provide training and capacity building to, other organizations that might need, to build their knowledge and, understanding about FGMC. We can also share knowledge and resources, as we are doing in this webinar. We can also develop joint strategies and action plans, referrals and support services, as I mentioned in the case of Ida. Community engagement is also very important. Advocacy and policy reform, as Caitlin, as Caitlin discussed in the last section. Also routine check-ins. As service providers and community allies, we should be able to do routine check-ins as partners, maybe quarterly or every 6 months or annually. We should be able to check on each other as to where are we in terms of in terms of collaboration. And yeah, so next slide, please. Yeah, so importance of collaboration. As I mentioned earlier, No one organization or individual can do this work alone. Hence the importance of, coming together, working together, building each other up, in our efforts to protect children from abuse, in this case, female genital mutilation or cutting. So when we collaborate, we ensure that care, improved protection and care is achieved. Also, holistic approach. Everyone brings, crucial and vital information and knowledge to the table. So in that case, we share our knowledge and broaden the work so that everyone can benefit and also work towards ending FGMC. Increase awareness and prevention, as we are doing in this webinar. We hope to help increase awareness and also prevent girls or children from going through FGMC. Efficiency and resource utilization. Yeah. So these, collaboration is very important. I cannot overemphasize the importance of collaboration. We cannot do it. No one can do it all alone. So that takes us to the final slide for me. I love this quote. It's an African proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. Yeah, I've been emphasizing throughout my presentation. We all have a moral obligation, to end FGMC, and in this case, whether you're a service provider or a community ally, we all have, we all in one way or the other can contribute, and in ending FGMC, and yeah. Key takeaways for me in this webinar, especially for service providers and all of you present in this training. Caitlin mentioned community champions. You don't have to be a government official to be a community champion. She highlighted Senator Kaiser from Washington State. She played a huge prominent role in ensuring that Washington State has a law against FGMC. But you don't have to be a government official, like Caitlin mentioned. You can be a service provider and have the capacity or have the authority or the resources to influence change. So as long as you have the authority to influence change, please, you are welcome. To be part of. To be part of this movement. We encourage everyone to contribute in one way or the other to be part of this movement to end FGMC. And yeah, so another thing is Caitlin with C mentioned is we just want to re-emphasize that FGMC is a global issue. We want everyone to go with this, that FGMC doesn't happen only in among immigrant communities or in Africa or in Asia. It happens everywhere. Recent data is a testimony to this, that it happens in 94 countries, including the United States. So we want people to understand that and relay the information that FGMC happens everywhere. So these are key takeaways that we want to leave you with. In case you have anything to add, please feel free to use the chat box. From here, I will pass it to my colleague, Caitlin Leme. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aissatou. So with that, we're happy to jump into the Q&A session. We did receive a couple questions in the chat so far. If anybody else has additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them. We've got a few minutes available for questions. The first one is for you, Aissatou, which is in the case study that you reviewed with about Ida. Heather asked, would you please provide an example of how you would navigate the beginning of this conversation? So around like assessing the risk when Ida talks about feeling nervous about going on this trip. So I don't know if you have any suggestions. I'm happy to jump into, but I want to hear your thoughts.
I'll just chip in. Caitlin, I will allow you to, to elaborate more on this. First of all, Jen should make sure Ida and her mom are very comfortable to discuss, the issue of FGMC, and what what I learned in my interaction with such with such scenarios or cases is, first of all, talk about not jumping directly to mentioning FGMC. It is important to maybe talk about other cultural issues related to FGMC, because it is a very sensitive topic, to be to be honest. So it's not advisable, or it's not ideal to jump to jump right on the issue of FGMC. Maybe try other cultural issues that are related to FGMC, for instance. Maybe what is culture? What do they understand culture is? As I used to do in my presentations back home in Gambia, before jumping directly on FGMC, what we do is give an overview, a brief overview of what culture is. Whether culture is changeable or not, whether cultures can change or not. Just to make them relax and comfortable. Talk about culture and bring examples of culture, for instance. Maybe in that conversation, Ida or her mom will mention FGMC as a form of cultural practice. And then you can use that opportunity to then, expand more on what FGMC is. But first of all, don't jump directly on explaining what FGMC is, but instead use other related, examples before jumping right on. Yeah, just not to create any any further trauma or uncomfortable situation for Ida and her mom. I'd like Caitlin to, elaborate more.
I agree with everything Isatu said, and the only reason why I'm jumping in is because I have a clinical background and I'm a licensed social worker. And I would just explore some of the feelings around their nervousness about traveling. Why are you nervous? Like, are you afraid to fly? Like, and just like sort of tapping into that a little bit, and oh, what are you going to be doing while you're there? What are you excited for? What are you nervous about while you'll be there? Who are you going to like? Just kind of approaching it with curiosity and just tapping into that a little bit. So, but I agree with everything that Isatu was saying as well. And just, learning more about them. And then the other question that we got is, have you all developed a risk assessment tool for people to use? So thank you for asking that, Ian. We have not, and I think there have been some risk assessment tools that have popped up in various resources created by different organizations that we have seen. We've shared some on our website, on our resource section, but there isn't any one standardized risk assessment tool that has been created specific to FGMC to date, at least not that we are aware of or know of. If anybody does know of any, please feel free to let us know or share it. But yeah, not one that has been like standardized or like that's like evidence-based or anything like that. There is certainly a need for that. But yeah, that would be incredibly helpful. So thank you for asking that. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. We could maybe answer one more. But while we are waiting for that, I can go on to the next, just kind of start our like closing. So we're just going to launch another poll. This is just our second poll. So if you could take a minute to answer these questions. One thing that we do want you to share too is if there is another webinar topic related to FGMC that you would like to would like to see us host, please feel free to share that in the chat, because that is really helpful for us to know about as well. Because we want to keep providing these webinars and trainings, but we want to hear from you all as to what topics are of interest to you so that we can provide that. While you all are filling out the poll, I would like to share more about our training and technical assistance. So this webinar is obviously part of our training and technical assistance, but it's not all of what we do. So we are here for you all to provide training and technical assistance on FGMC. As I mentioned, we are a collaborative team of our 4 organizations. So in addition to these webinars, we also provide one-on-one technical assistance, but at the organizational level. So we can come to your organization and provide trainings. We also offer office hours that you can just jump in to and ask a question that you may have about FGMC. We are also looking to form a learning collaborative as well for OVW grantees. And we're creating an online living resources hub as well. So we have a training and technical assistance request form so that you can request TA from us. And all of these offerings, as well as just information about our services, are included in this link, which we will include once again in the chat, so that, as well as how you can get in touch with us, either through this form or through emailing us. So if you are interested in our technical assistance, please feel free to either scan that QR code or click on the link that will be shared in the chat. And then we also wanted to share a number of resources with you that are related to this webinar. So the first one is a report that we created at the US Network called Empowered Narratives. This was a report from a series of listening sessions that we had with survivors where they talked about their experiences accessing services, as well as their knowledge around prevention, as well as critical intersections. And so this report is summarizing all of those conversations from those listening sessions. So that is an incredibly useful report. We also have a podcast called Changing Narratives, which is amplifying the voices from grassroots organizations working on FGMC. And the reason why I'm specifically lifting this up is not as a shameless plug, I promise you, but 2 out of the 3 episodes so far are specifically related to policy advocacy and amplifying a lot of the strategies that Caitlin talked about earlier in this webinar. So a lot of the grassroots movement building strategies. And so they provide concrete examples to a lot of the skills that Caitlin highlighted. So it's just a way to kind of provide more examples directly from people who are on the ground doing that work. So if you're interested in a lot of what Caitlin was sharing, these podcast episodes are another way to hear from the people who are actually doing that work. Washington is one of them. So Absa Samba, who we saw her video, she is one of the guests on one of the podcast episodes. So if you're interested in that work, you may be interested in that podcast episode. And then we also have a training manual for legal professionals. This is a very heavy, dense document, just as a warning. It's not just for everybody. It's a very long document, but it has all of the state law text, the federal law text. It's got case law. It's got information on asylum cases, all of that stuff. But it's a really useful document for legal professionals. And so because this was around legislation, we thought this would also be a really helpful tool. So all of those resources are shared in the chat as well. But on the US Network's website, we have a resource page that is just an incredibly comprehensive page of resources as well. So just our website alone is a tool for you all. So with all of that being said, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Caitlin and Isatu as well, for co-facilitating with me. Thank you to my project partners at SEO, George Washington University, and Global Women Peace Foundation. Thank you to OVW. So thank you all for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you all here with us today. I hope that this webinar was helpful for you all. And I hope that you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.